The thermometer read -15 as Mark's 18-wheeler slid toward the ditch. With no cell service and the nearest town miles away, he knew he might not survive the night. Through the swirling snow, a faint yellow light flickered in the distance. His only hope in the deadly Minnesota blizzard. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. And if you want more stories that touch the light within your heart, like this video, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell. Welcome to In the Heartlight. Let's begin. Eleanor Miller had always been a fixture in the small town of Pine Ridge, Minnesota. At 78, the silver-haired widow moved a bit slower these days, but her blue eyes still sparkled with the same determination that had carried her through nearly 8 decades of life's challenges. Her farmhouse sat on the edge of town, the white paint peeling and the porch sagging slightly, a stark contrast to how meticulously she kept her flower garden during the warmer months. The 2-story home had been in her family for 3 generations, built by her grandfather in 1932. Eleanor had been born there, raised there, and had cared for her husband Thomas there until he passed 5 years ago. Thomas Miller had been a Vietnam veteran, a quiet man who battled his demons silently. The couple never had children, a private sorrow that Eleanor had made peace with long ago. Instead, she had poured her nurturing spirit into a 40-year career as a nurse at the Veterans Hospital in the neighboring county. "I might not have had my own children, but I helped heal hundreds of America's sons," she often told her neighbors with pride. These days, Eleanor's life had settled into a simple routine. Her fixed income from Social Security and a modest pension covered her basic needs, but left little for the increasing repairs the aging farmhouse desperately needed. The roof leaked in 3 places, forcing her to place buckets strategically during rainstorms. The furnace wheezed and groaned, struggling to keep the drafty house warm as winter approached. The electrical wiring, installed decades before modern safety standards, occasionally made the lights flicker ominously. Yet Eleanor refused offers from her niece to move to a retirement community in the city. This was her home, her history, her heritage. She'd rather patch the holes and wear extra sweaters than abandon the place where she could still feel Thomas's presence in every creaking floorboard. Little did Eleanor know that the approaching winter storm would bring more than just snow to her doorstep. It would bring an unexpected chance to preserve her beloved home for years to come. The blizzard hit Pine Ridge with a vengeance that meteorologists would later describe as the worst in 30 years. Governor's warnings had been issued, travel bans enacted, but some travelers had already been on the road when the storm accelerated faster than predicted. Mark Reynolds was one of them. At 42, the former Army logistics specialist had transitioned to civilian life as a long-haul trucker, finding peace in the open road after his 3 tours in Afghanistan. His schedule was tight. The medical supplies in his trailer were needed at hospitals in Minneapolis, and he'd pushed on despite the darkening sky and increasingly urgent weather alerts on his radio. "Just another 40 miles, he kept telling himself as the snow began falling heavier, the wind howling around his cab like a living thing. But Mother Nature had other plans. On County Road 18, just a mile past Eleanor's farmhouse, Mark's truck began to hydroplane on black ice hidden beneath the fresh powder. He fought the wheel, using every technique from his military training, but physics won out. The massive vehicle slid sideways, then jackknifed, coming to rest with its nose in a roadside ditch, the trailer blocking most of the narrow country road. Mark's first instinct was to call for help, but his cell phone showed no service. The tower's likely affected by the storm. The truck's engine had stalled and refused to restart. As the temperature gauge in his cab dropped rapidly, Mark took stock of his situation. The insulated emergency kit in his truck would keep him from freezing immediately. But with temperatures plummeting to -15, He knew the cold would eventually become life-threatening. Through the whiteout conditions, Mark spotted a faint yellow light in the distance. A house? A farm? Whatever it was, it represented his best chance of survival. Bundling up in his heaviest gear, Mark stepped out into the brutal assault of wind and snow. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath as he began trudging toward the light, each step a battle against the thigh-deep snow and punishing wind. Meanwhile, Eleanor Miller sat by her living room window, wrapped in 2 afghans she had crocheted herself, watching the storm with concern. The power had flickered several times, and she had candles ready. The old furnace was working overtime, though the temperature inside had still dropped to a chilly 60 degrees. As she sipped her tea, a movement caught her eye. A dark figure, struggling through the snow near her property line. Eleanor adjusted her glasses, peering harder into the swirling white. Someone was out there in the killing cold. Without hesitation, Eleanor went to her closet and pulled out her heavy coat, boots, and the flashlight she kept by the door. Thomas had always told her that her kind heart would get her in trouble someday. Maybe he was right. But she couldn't sit warm inside, however relatively, while someone fought for their life in the blizzard. With arthritic hands, she pulled on her gear and opened her front door, the wind nearly knocking her slight frame backward. Bracing herself, Eleanor stepped onto her porch and began flashing her light toward the struggling figure, calling out against the roar of the storm. "Over here!" Eleanor shouted, her voice nearly lost in the howling wind. She waved the flashlight frantically, praying the stranger could see it through the blinding snow. Mark was nearly at the limits of his endurance when he spotted the flashlight beam cutting through the white haze. With renewed determination, he changed course toward it. Each step became increasingly difficult as the cold seeped through his clothes, numbing his extremities. When he finally reached the porch, he found a small, elderly woman gesturing urgently for him to follow her inside. Mark didn't need to be told twice. Together they pushed against the wind to close the door behind them. "Thank you," Mark gasped, his face red from cold, ice crystals forming in his beard. "My truck. The road, I couldn't." "Save your breath, young man," Eleanor said firmly, her nurse's training kicking in as she assessed him for signs of hypothermia. "Get those wet things off. Bathroom's down the hall. You'll find dry towels and my late husband's robe hanging on the door. It'll be big on me, but might be small on you. It's the best I can offer." Mark nodded gratefully and followed her directions. When he returned to the living room wearing Thomas's faded flannel robe, Eleanor had hot coffee waiting and had stoked the fire in the small wood stove that supplemented her failing furnace. "I'm Eleanor Miller," she said, handing him the steaming mug. "And you look like you've had quite a night, Mr. Reynolds." "Mark Reynolds. And yes, ma'am, I have." He wrapped his hands around the coffee mug, savoring the warmth. "I can't thank you enough. Another 30 minutes out there, and I'm not sure I would have made it." As Mark warmed up, he became increasingly aware of his surroundings. The house was clean, but in obvious disrepair. Water stains marked the ceiling in several places. The window frames were sealed with plastic sheeting to keep out drafts. An extension cord ran across the floor in a way that made Mark, with his military safety training, wince internally. "Been meaning to fix that," Eleanor said, noticing his gaze on a particularly large water stain. "Just haven't gotten around to it yet." Over the next few hours, as the storm intensified and it became clear Mark would need to shelter in place, he learned more about his host. Eleanor shared stories of her 40 years nursing veterans, men like his military brothers, men like himself. "My Thomas served in Vietnam," she said, nodding to a framed photograph on the mantel showing a serious young man in army dress uniform. "He came back different, quiet. But he was a good man who did his best." Mark found himself opening up to her about his own transition difficulties after leaving the army. "The structure's gone," he explained. "In the military, you always know the mission, the chain of command. Civilian life is fuzzier." Eleanor nodded with understanding. Thomas said the same thing, said trucking helped because it gave him a clear destination, a purpose. Mark smiled. That's exactly why I do it. As the night progressed and the storm showed no signs of abating, Mark's concern for Eleanor grew. The temperature outside had dropped further, and the old house's heating system was clearly inadequate. Eleanor had casually mentioned that she usually slept in the living room during winter storms, since it was the only room she could keep reasonably warm. "Mind if I take a look at your furnace?" Mark asked. "I'm no HVAC specialist, but I've picked up a few things over the years." Eleanor hesitated, pride briefly flashing across her face before pragmatism won out. "It's in the basement. Watch that third step. It's loose." The furnace was ancient, and Mark could immediately spot several issues that were reducing its efficiency. Using tools from Eleanor's late husband's workshop, he made some basic adjustments that helped improve the airflow and heat output. "Should run a bit better now," he told her upon returning upstairs. "But ma'am, this system needs professional attention. It's not just inefficient, it could be dangerous." Eleanor sighed. "I know. The repairman told me the same thing last winter. Wanted $8,000 for a new system. Might as well ask for the moon." Over the next 3 days, as the blizzard raged and then gradually subsided, Mark made himself useful around Eleanor's home. He fixed the loose stair tread, patched a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink, and temporarily sealed the worst of the roof leaks from inside the attic. With each repair, he discovered more serious problems. The electrical panel was dangerously outdated, the roof had rotted sheeting beneath the shingles, and the bathroom floor was soft from water damage. All expensive repairs far beyond what a simple handyman visit could address. On the third day, when the county snowplows finally cleared the roads, Mark helped Eleanor restock her supplies before retrieving his truck with the help of a local towing company. The medical supplies in his trailer, thankfully, were still secure and undamaged, thanks to the truck's auxiliary power system that had kept the temperature-controlled environment stable. As Mark prepared to leave, he found himself reluctant to say goodbye to the spirited elderly woman who had likely saved his life. "You know," Eleanor said as she packed him a bag of homemade cookies for the road, "Thomas always said everything happens for a reason. Maybe you weren't just stranded by chance." Mark nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe not. But I can't leave without saying this, Mrs. Miller. This house needs serious work, more than quick fixes. Have you looked into programs for seniors or veterans' families?" Eleanor's smile tightened slightly. "I've called around. There's waiting lists years long for most assistance programs. But don't you worry about me. I've weathered tougher storms than this, both literally and figuratively." As Mark finally pulled away in his truck, he couldn't shake the image of Eleanor standing on her porch, waving goodbye, the dilapidated house looming behind her. In the clear light of day, he could see that the entire east side of the roof was sagging dangerously. Back on the road, Mark couldn't focus on his audiobook, as he usually did. His mind kept returning to Eleanor, her kindness, her stories about caring for veterans like him, the dangerous condition of her home. She had likely saved his life by venturing out into that storm. And now she was alone again in a house that was one bad storm away from becoming uninhabitable. By the time Mark reached Minneapolis and delivered his cargo, he had made up his mind. He owed Eleanor Miller more than just gratitude. He owed her action. That night, in a motel outside the city, Mark created a social media post about his experience, tagging several veterans groups he belonged to. "Need help from my military family. An elderly widow of a Vietnam vet saved my life during the blizzard. She spent 40 years nursing vets like us. Now her home is falling apart around her. Pine Ridge, Minnesota. Who's with me to make this right?" Within hours, the post had been shared hundreds of times. By morning, Mark's phone was buzzing with messages from former military colleagues, fellow truckers, and even strangers touched by the story. What had started as a simple call for help was rapidly transforming into something much bigger than Mark had imagined. 3 weeks after the blizzard, Eleanor Miller was startled by the sound of multiple vehicles pulling into her driveway early on a Saturday morning. Peering through her window, she was astonished to see 4 pickup trucks, 2 vans, and a large truck pulling what appeared to be a construction trailer. Her first instinct was confusion. Had she forgotten some appointment? Was this some kind of mistake? Then she recognized one of the men climbing out of the lead truck. Mark Reynolds, the trucker she'd sheltered during the storm. Eleanor opened her door just as Mark reached the porch, a broad smile on his face and a rolled set of papers under his arm. "Mr. Reynolds, what a surprise," she said, genuinely confused by the small army of people unloading equipment from their vehicles. "What's all this?" Mark's smile widened. "Mrs. Miller, Eleanor, remember when I said everything happens for a reason? Well, I think the reason I got stranded in that blizzard was so I could meet you and learn your story." He gestured to the group assembled in her driveway. "These folks agree with me. We've got veterans from 3 states here, ma'am. Some truckers, some contractors, some just handy people who wanted to help. We're here to fix your house." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. But that's not possible. The cost would be already covered," Mark interrupted gently, unrolling the papers to reveal building plans. "After I left, I reached out to some people. The story of how you risked your life to save me and how you spent your career caring for veterans struck a chord. Donations have been coming in from veterans groups across the Midwest. Local businesses have donated materials, and everyone here is volunteering their time." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the small crowd in her yard. Men and women of different ages, some wearing hats or jackets indicating their military branches, all smiling at her with purpose and determination. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. A tall man stepped forward. "Nothing to say, ma'am. Just think of it as a long overdue thank you from the veterans community. I was at the Minneapolis VA hospital in the 90s. Nurses like you made all the difference." What Eleanor didn't know was that the project had almost fallen apart just days earlier. Initial inspections had revealed that the damage to her home was far more extensive than Mark had initially estimated. The electrical system wasn't just outdated, it was dangerously close to causing a fire. The roof didn't just leak. Significant portions of the support structure had rotted away. The foundation had cracks that threatened the home's structural integrity. The night before, Mark had gathered the core team of volunteers at a local motel to discuss the challenges. "This is beyond what we budgeted for," said Frank, a retired contractor and Army veteran. "We're looking at major structural work, not just repairs. We might need to tell her we can only fix the most critical safety issues." The mood in the room had darkened until Darius, a former Navy Seabee, stood up. "That's not how we operated overseas, and it's not how we're going to operate here," he said firmly. "When we built schools in Afghanistan and the funding came up short, we found a way. Mrs. Miller spent her life taking care of our brothers and sisters. We're not doing this halfway." By midnight, they had reorganized the entire project. Phone calls were made, additional specialists recruited, and 3 more local businesses had pledged materials. What had started as a repair job had evolved into a complete renovation mission. Now, standing on Eleanor's porch, Mark didn't share these behind-the-scenes challenges. Instead, he gently explained that she would need to relocate temporarily while they worked. "Your neighbor, Mrs. Estror Jankowski, has offered her guest room. We should have you back home in about 2 weeks." Eleanor looked overwhelmed. 2 weeks? But that's so much work. "We're military, ma'am," said a woman in her 30s wearing a Marine Corps cap. "We know how to get things done efficiently." As Eleanor was helped to pack some essentials, the team got to work with military precision. Teams were assigned, safety protocols established, and demolition began on the most damaged sections of the house. By midday, they had made a disturbing discovery. Behind the living room wall, where Eleanor often sat in her favorite chair, they found electrical wiring that had been severely compromised by water damage and rodents. The insulation around several wires had been completely worn away, with charring on the adjacent wooden studs. "This could have gone up in flames any day," whispered Frank to Mark. "She's lucky to be alive." The discovery added urgency to their mission. What had already been important now felt vital. They weren't just improving Eleanor's home, they were potentially saving her life. When local news caught wind of the story, a reporter arrived to interview Mark and Eleanor. The resulting segment, which aired that evening, brought even more support. By nightfall, a local restaurant had volunteered to provide meals for the work crew, and more skilled volunteers had arrived offering their services. The renovation quickly became a community event. Neighbors brought coffee and homemade snacks. Children from the local school made thank you cards for Eleanor and the workers. The mayor stopped by with news that the town council had unanimously voted to waive all permit fees for the project. As challenges arose, and they did, frequently, Mark drew on his military leadership training. When they discovered the plumbing would need to be completely redone, he reorganized the work schedule and called in favors from 2 plumbers in a neighboring town. When unexpected asbestos was found in a section of the basement, he quickly arranged for a specialized removal team. Through it all, the team kept focused on their mission, giving Eleanor a safe, warm home where she could age with dignity, a fitting thank you for her lifetime of service to veterans. 14 days after the renovation began, Eleanor Miller stood on the sidewalk in front of her home, a blindfold covering her eyes and Mark gently guiding her forward. "Just a few more steps," he said, barely containing his excitement. "Ready?" Around them, dozens of people had gathered. The renovation volunteers, neighbors, local business owners who had donated supplies, and even a camera crew from the regional news station. "I'm ready," Eleanor said, her voice trembling slightly. Mark removed the blindfold, and Eleanor gasped. For a moment, she thought she must be standing in front of the wrong house. The structure before her had the same shape and size as her family home, but everything else had been transformed. The peeling paint and rotting wood had been replaced with beautiful new siding in a warm cream color with navy blue trim. Her favorite colors, which she had once mentioned casually to Mark. The sagging porch had been rebuilt and now featured a charming swing and potted plants. New windows gleamed in the sunlight, and the roofline was now straight and solid, covered with architectural shingles that would last for decades. It's beautiful," Eleanor whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I don't recognize it." "That's just the outside," Mark said with a smile. "Wait until you see what's inside." As Eleanor walked through her front door, the transformation continued to unfold. The interior had been completely renovated with accessibility in mind. Wider doorways that could accommodate a wheelchair if ever needed. A first-floor bedroom and full bathroom with grab bars and a walk-in shower. The kitchen featured lowered counters in one section and new energy-efficient appliances. The living room still held Eleanor's cherished antiques and family photos, now displayed on new shelves built by one of the volunteers. Thomas's military shadow box had been professionally restored and held a place of honor above the new energy-efficient fireplace that replaced the old wood stove. But perhaps most touching was the sunroom that had been added to the back of the house, overlooking the garden, where Eleanor had once told Mark she spent her happiest hours during warmer weather. "Now you can enjoy your garden view year-round," Mark explained. As Eleanor toured her transformed home, various specialists explained the improvements. The new HVAC system that would keep her warm in winter and cool in summer while reducing her utility bills. The insulation that would make the house more comfortable and efficient. The security system, donated by a local company. The ramp at the side entrance that was just in case, as they put it tactfully. When the tour concluded, they gathered in the living room where the mayor of Pine Ridge waited with an official-looking document. "Mrs. Miller," he began, "your story has touched our entire community. The way you've cared for veterans throughout your career and then risked your own safety to help Mark during the blizzard, well, it exemplifies the best of Pine Ridge. Today I'm pleased to present you with this proclamation from the Town Council, declaring this day Eleanor Miller Day, in recognition of your lifetime of service." The room erupted in applause as Eleanor, overwhelmed, accepted the framed document with trembling hands. Next, a representative from the County Veterans Affairs Office stepped forward. "Mrs. Miller, we've been reviewing your case, and I'm pleased to inform you that as the widow of a Vietnam veteran and given your own service to veterans, you qualify for several benefits you haven't been receiving. We've fast-tracked your application, and you'll be receiving additional monthly support moving forward, which should help with the ongoing maintenance of your beautiful home." More applause filled the room as Eleanor covered her mouth in shock. "I never knew," she said simply. "Thomas always handled those things, and after he passed, I didn't know who to ask." "That's why we're here now," the VA representative assured her. "No more falling through the cracks." As the celebration continued, local news cameras captured the moment for the evening broadcast. The reporter interviewed Mark about what had inspired such a massive community effort. "Eleanor Miller saved my life during that blizzard," he said simply. "But more than that, she represents a generation that gave so much and asked for so little in return. Sometimes as a society, we forget to honor that generation until it's too late. This was our chance to say thank you while it still mattered." 6 months later, Eleanor's renovated home had become a gathering place for the community in ways she never could have imagined. The large dining table in her new kitchen, specially built by a furniture maker whose father had been one of Eleanor's patients years ago, regularly hosted what had become known as Veterans Sunday Dinner. It had started small, with Mark stopping by whenever his trucking route brought him through Pine Ridge. Then he began bringing fellow veteran friends. Soon, local veterans heard about the warm welcome and delicious food at Eleanor's table and began showing up too. Eleanor thrived with the company. After decades of caring for others professionally, she had found a new purpose in retirement. The younger veterans appreciated her no-nonsense approach to their struggles, while the Vietnam-era veterans found a rare understanding in someone who had witnessed firsthand the challenges of that generation's return home. "My Thomas would have loved this," she told Mark one Sunday afternoon as they watched a group of veterans of various ages chatting on her new porch. "He always wanted our home to be filled with people, but he struggled with crowds after he came back. This would have made him so happy." The renovation had sparked something larger than just one home repair. Mark had followed through on his promise to create a non-profit organization called Operation Home Front, dedicated to identifying and helping elderly members of veterans' families who needed housing assistance. Already, 2 other homes in neighboring counties had received renovations. Local businesses had embraced the initiative, with a regional building supply company pledging materials for 4 projects annually. A technical college had developed a program where trade students could earn credit while working on the renovations, ensuring a steady stream of skilled volunteers. For Eleanor, the physical changes to her home had improved her health and outlook dramatically. The allergies she had suffered for years, likely exacerbated by mold and poor air quality in her deteriorating home, had diminished significantly. The new heating system meant she no longer endured bone-chilling cold during winter months. Her doctor noted improved mobility, which he attributed to her being more active in a home where she didn't have to worry about hazards. But perhaps most meaningful was the photograph that now hung in her entryway. A large group shot of all the volunteers who had worked on her home, standing proudly in front of the finished project. Next to it hung the worn photograph of Thomas in his military uniform. Visitors often commented on how Thomas seemed to be watching over the renovation team with approval. On a particularly beautiful autumn evening, as the sunset cast a golden glow across her garden, Eleanor sat on her porch swing with Mark, who was passing through town on a delivery run. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "when that blizzard hit, I was seriously considering selling this place. The repairs seemed impossible, and I was starting to think maybe my niece was right about that retirement community." Mark looked surprised. "You never mentioned that." Eleanor smiled. "Because the moment I saw you struggling through that snow, none of it mattered anymore. There was someone who needed help, and I had a warm home to offer, however imperfect it was. That's what we're here for, isn't it? To help each other through the storms?" Mark nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in her words. "One act of kindness," Eleanor continued, gesturing toward her transformed home and the community it now served. "Look what it can do when it's multiplied." As the camera pulled back for the final shot, viewers could see Eleanor's home glowing with warmth and light against the darkening sky, a beacon in the small town, much like the woman herself had been a beacon for Mark during the blizzard that had brought them together. If this story touched your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories from In the Heartlight. And don't forget to check out the videos currently on your screen. Remember, sometimes the greatest kindness comes back to us in ways we never could have imagined.